Today on Trial Watch.
She was planning on going over to Africa to move in with a guy who was still married. It just was not the thing you should be doing with a 3-year-old.
So why did the court award custody to the unfaithful mother instead of the loving father?
I came to know her as a very caring, kind, generous, and outgoing person.
Then, the Reverend came to know his wife as a woman who may have poisoned 4 men, including him. All this, plus how to beat a traffic ticket, today on Trial Watch. Real people, real trials. Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Weller. With me, co-anchor and attorney Lisa Specht.
Hello. Welcome to Trial Watch.
The Reverend Dwight Moore holds a dubious honor. Doctors say he ate more arsenic than anyone who ever lived to talk about it. 3 other men, his wife's father, lover, and first husband, weren't so lucky. They never got to tell anyone how much arsenic they ate.
I came to know her as a very caring, kind, generous, and outgoing person. And also, from all appearances, a very dedicated Christian woman that had the appearance of being a fine companion for a pastor.
This North Carolina country preacher was very nearly loved to death. Dwight Moore married Blanche Taylor, an attractive widow. Little did he suspect she could be a black widow.
Just 2 days after we had returned from a honeymoon trip, I became ill. As I recall, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after eating a chicken filet sandwich and drinking iced tea that Blanche had brought to me from a fast food restaurant.
Dwight was so ill, doctors say he should have died. Massive amounts of arsenic were discovered in his system. The police suspected foul play. The likely suspect, his new bride.
I denied that that was possible and defended her for a good while, and simply could not comprehend that that would have been possible.
Authorities dug deep into her past. The 3 other men in her life had died of heart attacks that could have been due to arsenic poisoning. They exhumed bodies of her father, Parker Kaiser Sr., her first husband, James Taylor, and her former lover, Raymond Reed.
It was only when Raymond Reed's body had been exhumed and they discovered arsenic in his body that it clicked in my mind. At that point, I became, if not convinced, had the feeling that she had to be the one that was responsible.
Blanche Taylor Moore stood accused of all 3 deaths and the attempted murder of her current husband, Dwight Moore. But late last year, she was tried for only 1 murder, that of Raymond Reed, her former boyfriend and supermarket co-worker.
Blanche was a deeply troubled person. There were emotional problems that were deeply buried, that simply were not obvious.
Forsyth County prosecutors put Dwight on the stand, still visibly disabled from the arsenic. He told a chilling story of how he may have bought his own poison.
She showed me a bottle and asked if I could purchase some of this particular substance.
Do you remember what the substance was?
Yes, I do.
What was it?
The substance was anti-ant.
Blanche even took the stand in her own defense, countering prosecutors' claims she'd tried to continue poisoning Raymond Reed while he was dying in the hospital.
I think anyone visiting a hospital, if you go in and you have a desire to hurt someone, you would have the opportunity. But I never did anything to Raymond to hurt him.
But prosecutors say the testimony of this pioneer criminologist was the turning point of the trial. Dr. Vincent Gwynn helped prove the method to Blanche's madness. And next on Trial Watch, we'll tell you how the state proved its case using radioactivity and a lock of hair. Blanche Taylor Moore was suspected of killing 3 men, her father, a husband, and a lover. She killed them, police say, by poisoning them with arsenic. At her trial, criminologist Vincent Gwynn used modern science and a few strands of hair to make his case.
If you take samples of hair from a suspected person and cut them up into little sections and analyze each section for arsenic, you can not only find the arsenic if it's there, you can measure how much is in that little sample, and from how far out from the root end it was, you can tell, date it back to when it was administered.
Dr. Gwynn did his crime fighting with a nuclear reactor and radioactivity.
You use this much fancier device called a gamma ray spectrometer, and that is able to distinguish which different radioactive elements are in the sample. Of these various peaks, this particular one is due to gamma rays from radioactive arsenic.
Here are the levels of arsenic Dr. Gwynn found. The black bars show Blanche's father, Parker Kaiser Sr., ingested a huge dose of arsenic just before his death 25 years ago. Her first husband, James Taylor, was slowly poisoned to death over a period of months. Dwight Moore, her current husband, was poisoned for several months before their wedding. And former lover Raymond Reed also ate lethal quantities.
Chronic arsenic poisoning, where less than a fatal dose is given, the person may become ill, but the symptoms aren't so marked. And then they may try again with a somewhat larger dose, and each dose weakens the person so that they eventually may die, with still not arsenic poisoning being considered.
After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict.
Guilty of first-degree murder.
Blanche Taylor Moore was sentenced to the gas chamber.
Prisoner Blanche Kaiser Taylor Moore to be put to death as by law provided. May God have mercy on her soul.
It was just an extremely somber and deep kind of moment for me. I shudder almost to recall the words of the judge when he said in the traditional fashion, I sentence you to death.
The Reverend Dwight Moore is nearly recovered from his brush with death. He spent many hours contemplating why his wife would want to kill all the men in her life.
I think that it was easier for Blanche to do away with people than to end relationships.
Later this month, the Reverend Moore's divorce from Blanche becomes final. Not that that's the biggest legal hurdle she faces. Right now, she's waiting to hear the results of her appeal on the murder conviction, and she's waiting on death row.
Coming up next on Trial Watch, just because someone is a biological parent doesn't make them a good one. But when it came to awarding custody of this little boy, the court didn't care. For Jim Atkinson, the most important thing in life is his 9-year-old son, Baird. That's why he fought a lonely, ugly, and costly legal battle to keep his unfaithful wife from taking Baird away. Jim is the person who changed Baird's diapers, taught him his ABCs, and loved him as only a father can. Problem is, Jim isn't Baird's father.
Pictures and memories. That's about all Jim Atkinson has of his son, the child he's loved for nearly 10 years.
We really get along well together.
Because of a legal technicality, Jim lost custody of his son Baird after one of the nastiest divorces in Michigan history.
A parent is more than just a biological figure. A parent is a psychological figure who the child looks to for love, affection, and guidance.
That's just what his son looked for in Jim, while his mother looked for love in all the wrong places. Jim's wife, Terry, was a travel agent. During a luxury cruise, she had an affair with a married man.
On her trip to Antarctica, she met a wealthy South African man. She came home and she told Jim that she was in love with this man, she wanted to marry this man, and that she wanted to move to South Africa with the minor child, and that he would never see the child again.
Like any good father, Jim Atkinson tried to stop her. He spent more than $100,000 in lengthy court battles fighting for custody of his little boy. And just about everyone thought Baird should live with Jim. Court-appointed investigators testified Jim was the better parent. Terry's own sister said Terry didn't seem to care much about the child.
She was planning on going over to Africa to move in with a guy who was still married, and not knowing anybody over there or having no job or any of that. It just was not the thing you should be doing with a 3-year-old. She is very vindictive, and it's got to be her way or no way at all. That's basically how she was growing up.
Terry refused to talk with Trial Watch, but her sister said she was relentless about getting her own way in court, no matter who she hurt.
It was only after Terry found out that Jim was being recommended for custody that Terry decided to pull an ace out of her pocket and indicate that Jim was not the biological parent of Baird, but that Jim was nothing more than Baird's stepfather.
Terry publicly labeled her own son a bastard so she could take him halfway around the world, away from the only father he ever loved.
Having gone through a divorce myself a couple of years before, 2 or 3 years before Jim and Terry broke up, I know that the best thing for kids is to offer them stability, and Jim could.
A court-ordered blood test confirmed that Jim wasn't Baird's biological father. So, incredibly, Oakland County Circuit Judge Richard Kuhn in effect rewarded Terry's infidelity by giving her custody of the little boy and denying Jim visitation rights.
The friend of the court had already issued a recommendation that said Baird should come and live with me as far as custody, and then the judge turns around and says, oh, wait a minute, there's a biological factor here. Well, what did that biological factor have to do with Baird? Nothing. He was a 3-year-old child. He didn't know what biology was.
A ray of hope appeared when Jim's lawyer, Michael Robbins, uncovered a 100-year-old court case.
In essence, what the court said was had Baird Atkinson died, Jim would have inherited as if he was the father. Had Jim died, Baird would have inherited as if he was the son. So if in death they would have been father and son, it doesn't make sense that in life they are no longer father and son.
Using that argument, Jim appealed the decision denying him the right to see his little boy. In an historic ruling, the court established the equitable parents doctrine, granting legal rights to people who actually raise a child, even if they aren't the biological parent. Not only did he win new rights for step-parents, he finally won the right to see his son.
I won the case. I've got a new doctrine out there, which I understand is being put to good use.
Although Jim now has the right to visit his son, Judge Kuhn still refused to reverse his decision, giving Terry custody.
She will not let him call me. She will not let him write letters. She will not accept letters. I've tried to get a letter through to him, and it has not gotten through. Any kind of communication whatsoever is not permitted.
Oh, I think they're horrendous. I think it's terrible. You know, to use Baird like that, to get back at Jim. I mean, I can't even have any contact with Baird.
Despite being deprived of his father, Baird is a surprisingly well-adjusted 9-year-old boy.
I give Baird a lot of credit. He's done magnificent. He's a good kid. He really is, and he tries hard. You know, he tries hard to please both parents.
He's a very resilient boy. I think that the way that we've handled the situation, he's come through it real well.
Even though he only gets to see Baird for a few weeks each year, Jim says he'd fight the legal wars all over again. He says those few weeks are the happiest of the year.
Well, next on Trial Watch, they let their family picture be used to promote a religious charity. They never thought they'd see it in an article on sex. Call it the fickle fate of the Fingers. Joe and Ida Finger are the proud parents of 6 beautiful children. So they happily agreed to let a religious magazine print a picture of the family. They were shocked when they saw the photo in a second magazine, in an article about sex. They felt betrayed and filed a $30 million lawsuit. It all started when Joe and Ida Finger were asked by Catholic Charities if their family would pose for a photo for its magazine. The Fingers had once been helped by the organization, so they gladly said yes. Little did they know that a few years later, the photo would come back to haunt them. To their surprise, it turned up in the June 1988 issue of Omni magazine, alongside an article titled Caffeine and Fast Sperm.
We were very surprised to see our picture with an article that had to do with a male drinking a lot of caffeine, which would help his sperm count shoot further and increase his sperm count to make a larger family.
The article discussed a breakthrough for couples who were using in vitro fertilization to have children. A study had shown that sperm injected with high doses of caffeine had a much better chance of fertilizing an egg. This might have been good news to couples who had been unable to have children, but it had nothing to do with Ida and Joe.
My children, they were all, naturally childbirth, and, had no artificial techniques with it.
Part of the caption under the Fingers photo read, "Want to have a big family? Maybe your sperm needs a cup of Java in the morning."
When I first seen the photo, I was very upset. And then when I read the article and the caption under the picture, it kind of really got to me even more because Joe's not a coffee drinker. I'm the coffee drinker.
The Fingers slammed the magazine shut and opened a $30 million lawsuit against Omni.
We were seeking not only, in layman's terms, what might be called actual damages, but also punitive damages against the magazine for using the photograph without their permission.
It turned out that Omni had purchased the Fingers picture from a photo supplier, which in turn had bought it from the photographer.
It is not always possible to have a cameraman on site to take a picture of the exact event that is happening. And the very fact that you have to look for photographs that may have been taken years ago makes the ability to obtain consent of the people in the picture often difficult, if not impossible, particularly when you're working under deadline.
When you weigh that burden, which I suggest is not much of a burden at all, with the imposition on the privacy of the Finger family in this case, in my opinion, the court should come down on the side of the individual rather than the side of the publication, because the publication has avenues available to obtain photographs from consenting participants.
But the courts sided with Omni, not once, but 3 different times.
The court was saying there may be no relationship between the very specific kind of study that was involved and reported in the article, but there's certainly a connection between a family of 6 children, all of whom bear a striking resemblance to their parents, and the theme of fertility and increased fertility.
Myself, personally, I don't know how they reached the decision. To me, it's wrong, and I'm very bitter about it.
The Fingers are upset because following the published article, their children were harassed at school.
I told my mom and dad that I don't feel like staying in school anymore because I hate getting teased a lot.
Even now, Tanya cries when she thinks about it. As for Omni, it says it's sorry if the Fingers have suffered because it used their photo.
If they felt embarrassed, I'm sorry. But they should be reminded that, Omni is a quality magazine, and it's not like they appeared in a tabloid or they appeared in, something that reports on aliens coming to the planet and suddenly, it's the Fingers. No, they were in a very respectable, very well-regarded science journal. I think they should be flattered. I really feel they should be.
Joe Finger sees it differently.
These companies, big companies, they get away with playing with the little people.
And Ida hopes other people will learn a lesson from what happened to her family.
To be careful of anybody that takes your picture. Make sure they don't turn around and use your picture for other things than what it's really meant for.
Well, the Fingers were out of luck. Their attorney says the lawsuit is now at a dead end and it won't be appealed. So, Lisa, if someone is asked to take a photo for a good cause, should they just say no?
No, not at all, Rob. What they should do is make the person who asked for their picture put the agreement in writing, how it will be used, when it will be used, and where it will be used. The written agreement should be as specific as possible, and it should be signed and dated, too. And now, coming up, when we return, we'll tell you how to fight a traffic ticket and win. You're lucky if your worst brush with the law is getting a traffic ticket, but sometimes you're sure you don't even deserve that. Let's say you get a ticket for running a stop sign, but the sign was almost completely hidden by a tree. You don't want to pay the fine, but it's not worth hiring a lawyer either. Well, you don't need a lawyer to challenge a traffic ticket. You can represent yourself in court and win. The key is preparation. Before going to court, go back to the scene of the crime and take a picture of the stop sign from the driver's point of view. This will show the judge how the tree branches hid the sign. Also, make a diagram of the intersection to prove that the photo really represents the driver's perspective. Now you have evidence to dispute the officer's version of what happened. And you've demonstrated to the judge that you've taken this matter seriously enough to prepare a defense. A recent university study demonstrated that 3 out of 4 motorists who showed up in court with solid evidence did not have to pay a fine. And one more thing, if the policeman who ticketed you doesn't show up in court, there is a very good chance you'll win automatically because the judge will probably dismiss the ticket. That's it for today.
There you go. All right, join us tomorrow for Trial Watch. Real people, real trials.